Elder Smith declared, frequent reorientation in church teachings was necessary as horizons of human knowledge and experience broadened. He said, what was adequate for Moses' time was not adequate for Christ's. What was adequate for the prophet Joseph's time is not adequate for ours. And our grandchildren's world will find our interpretations inadequate. Their world will have so changed that fundamental truth, in order to function for their benefit, will have to be interpreted in light of their needs and problems. Now, Elder Smith would be 144 years old today. The grandchildren of whom he spoke are now grandparents. The onus, he says, is on the older generations to engage with the needs and problems of the younger generations.
I was asking, is the church true? Are its teachings correct? So to my high school self, these questions were important and also terrifying because the validity of so many other things seemed to hinge on these questions. I knew I'd have to figure this out, but at the same time, I didn't want to. I feared there was a zero-sum contest between my religious truth and everyone else's truth. What if the church lost? And then what could I believe and who would I be? For help, I turned to my crazy Uncle Charles, as he called himself. My dad's little brother, a Stanford and Harvard-educated professor of Japanese literature at Tufts University. I told him my doubts about Latter-day Saint claims. I wrote very long emails asking these questions. What about evolution? What about blacks in the priesthood? What about polygamy? What about Joseph Smith saying there were 5-foot-high Quakers living on the moon? Uncle Charles replied that long ago when he was an undergraduate, he too had doubts. He had gone to another Latter-day Saint professor for help. This professor had said, there are a lot of stories in the world, but Mormonism is the story that I want to be true. Uncle Charles concluded his message to me with the statement, there are a lot of stories in the world, but the Mormon story is the one I want to be true. To the extent that it is not, I will make it true. Now at the time I read this as a sort of well-meaning self-deception. But to say something like, the extent that it is not, I will make it true, sounded foolish and also a little arrogant. You can't make a religion true. There had to be a right answer that was definitely and completely right. Despite this ambivalence, I was ultimately comforted by Uncle Charles's endorsement, incomplete as it seemed at the time. Maybe there were some things about religion that weren't clear to me at the moment, but Uncle Charles was pretty smart. So later on, I did a PhD, I researched Asian religions and lots of histories of religions, and I didn't see anything exceptionally problematic about the Latter-day Saint tradition. Although I knew that many in my church have been terribly disillusioned by historic or contemporary blemishes in the church's institutional structures and people. I found big problems in all the world's traditions and theologies and histories and all of those things that I studied. But with regard to these things that trouble people about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, some might say, Joseph Smith lied to his rank-and-file followers, and most importantly to his wife Emma about his practice of polygamy. Therefore, he wasn't a prophet, and therefore the religion that he founded is all bogus. Or others might say, the church's structure is patriarchal, and patriarchy is oppressive to women. Therefore, the patriarchs are not called of God, and the church is all bogus. There was a time in my life when I would have thought about religion in the same uncompromisingly syllogistic way, and that's how I felt when as a high school student I asked Uncle Charles, is the church true? Are his teachings correct? In my mind, just one flaw, such as a teaching attributed to Joseph Smith, could set off the whole chain reaction that ended up with my faith being bogus. To me at the time, Uncle Charles's response was small comfort. To the extent that the church is not true, I will make it true. If something is bogus, I thought, how can you do anything to make it true? Doctrinal teaching is important, but I don't think any story we try to tell about God can be complete as a truth in itself. To me, the way truths become manifest in lived experience is a more valid measure of what is real or divine. Who cares about whether something is true by any abstract measure, including intellectual and theological argument, if it cannot be realized in our daily work, our bodies, or most importantly, relationships with fellow beings? In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that what people did was more important than what people said, by that people could be known by their fruits. So maybe when Uncle Charles said, I will make it true, he was simply making the effort required to exercise faith. Perhaps he was also speaking of Latter-day Saints' responsibility to exercise initiative in addition to faith, to do our part to bring our culture and everyday practices into harmony with our highest beliefs and values, to doggedly keep our covenants to follow Christ and be known as his people.
I learned that loss makes us both vulnerable and strong. We lose things that are dear to us that make us beautiful or happy or whole. Sometimes this loss is readily apparent, but sometimes it isn't. I had always been a competitive person, a Harvard graduate, a marathoner, but now I felt vulnerable, dependent on others to be kind to me. This vulnerability helped me better understand and accept the vulnerability in others. In this way, as it says near the end of the Book of Mormon, in Ether 12:27, our weakness becomes a strength.